Welcome, welcome, welcome to another reading of The Great Cosmic Mother, Rediscovering the Religion of the Earth by Monica Shu and Barbara Moore. Um, this is most likely going to be the final reading. Final reading. We're at that point. We are currently in this chapter called Beyond the Male God and His Machine. And I'm going to go ahead and pick up where we left off, okay? All right. The other face of the patriarchal God is economic exploitation. Economic exploitation and war, as we have seen, are two faces on one head. They're inextricably connected. Okay, I'm trying to get comfortable in this there, okay? All right, just as the ancient shared work and celebration ritual groups of women were the original communalism, in which matrifocal cultures men participated also for at least 300,000 years, so the Bronze Age patriarchal desire to control feminine sex or female sex and reproduction, and thus all human labor and production, was the origin of fascism. The American Heritage Dictionary of the English Language defines fascism as a system of government that exercises a dictatorship of the extreme right, typically through the merging of state and business leadership together with a belligerent nationalism. But throughout 4,000 years of patriarchal history, state and business leadership have always been merged, and the merger has been maintained in power by a belligerent nationalism, i.e., the war machine, always in the service of state and business interests, both at home and abroad. The only thing missing from this definition is the role of patriarchal religion, or a deified patriarchal ideology, in providing a divine rationalization or a heavy mystique for the fascistic apparatus. If we follow this definition, it is not too far-fetched to say that the history of patriarchy is the history of fascism, and that patriarchal economics or economic systems have always been fascistic economic systems in which court, state, religious, military, and business ruling elites collude in mutual empowerment and power reinforcement to exploit human labor and Earth's resources, beginning with the exploitation of female reproductive labor and female creative communal labor in general. Historic revolutions in the West have effectively done little more than add new economic groups to collusion, e.g., the 18th and 19th century edition of the European bourgeois to the ruling elites of Europe, or the more complex 20th century edition of the Soviet political military elite to the fascistic power organization of the West generally. The wealth of the West, the wealth-making economic system known popularly as the Western free enterprise system, was built from the ground up, as we know, via brutalization of the working class, slave labor, and colonialism. 18th century laissez-faire liberal economics, now enjoying a revival as neoconservative economics, was solidly based and wholly dependent upon the violent exploitation of colonial resources and native or imported slave labor, as well as the forcible maintenance of indentured and subsistence wage labor in the home countries. Profits occurred in the free enterprise system solely because the profiteers were allowed, via the fascistic collusion of state, business, military, religious elites, to ravage people and environments without paying recompense or undergoing regulation. It also had whole continents of untapped natural resources, Asia, India, Africa, the Americas, to lavishly plunder without interference. Indigenous Populations of these rich continents were massacred, enslaved, missionized, destroyed by imported diseases, or pushed further and further into uninhabitable areas which they managed to inhabit through sheer grit, while the colonialists ripped off all the good land. Many colonized people fought back and sometimes won temporarily, but they could not hold out against well armed imperial armies, especially in a mercilessly mercenary world in which no one cared if they were slaughtered or not, and few came to their aid. This is why the 18th century was the great heyday of laissez faire profiteering. The world conditions were optimal for global plunder, i.e., large scale profit taking, um, i.e., let me say that again, i.e., so the world conditions were optimal for global plunder, i.e., large scale profit taking depends on these fascistic conditions. In the 20th century, the conditions are reversed. Rapidly dwindling and polluting resources and large decolonized populations, often armed and ready to throw off the yokes of Western exploitation. In this, they are backed by world sympathy and also usually by the military and economic support of one world power or another. Even if the third world was completely depopulated, 18th century style laissez faire profiteering could not be repeated for long. Due to their depletion by greed, many major world resources are due to run out, to disappear by the end of the 20th century. The most dwindling resource of all, it seems, is the brain power of neoconservative economists and those free enterprise capitalist apologists who fail or refuse to see the complete reversal of global conditions and instead suggest that the solution to the 20th century is to return to the 18th and 19th centuries, that colonialist imperialist paradise of unobstructed plunder, slave trading, and labor exploitation. In fact, the capitalist free market system is structurally and functionally incapable of working if it pays decent wages and provides full employment. This is why it must fight against worker empowerment through unionization. Evidence that free enterprise capitalism cannot work without one, fascistic control, and two, subsistence level wages lies in the global factory system itself. American corporate capitalism saved itself by leaving America, where unionized workers had fought for and won relatively high wages and decent conditions and fringe benefits, and setting up free track zones throughout the third world, where, as always, free is a euphemism for fascistic control over workers' lives throughout the third world, where, as always, free is a euphemism for fascistic control over workers' lives on and off the job and the payment of feudal system wages. Neoconservative economics is, in effect, the same old fascist economics that have defined patriarchal exploit for profit, social and moral systems from the beginning. The evolution of law and economics theory out of this mindset is inevitable, with human beings defined from womb to tomb as market commodities and all laws governing social conditions and relations rewritten to structure human life in terms of its market value. If we do not call this neo-fascist economics, perhaps neo-pastoralist would be appropriate, the breeding of human life for economic use and slaughter. What does this have to do with women, and in particular American women? The overwhelming majority of starving, malnourished, and homeless people on earth are women and children. In the third world, millions of women and children and elderly people also, displaced by chronic war and related famine, are crowded into refugee camps. Refugee camps have become, in fact, a permanent mode of existence for millions of people, most of them women and children. In the Western nations, more and more children and women of all ages are huddled at the bottom of the wobbling economic ladder, ghettoized, pauperized, permanently stigmatized as refugees from an economic system that cannot even support its own premises, let alone support all its poor people. American women and children are joining these populations of poverty refugees in larger and larger numbers every year. According to the 1980 census, more than 15% of Americans lived in poverty, 13 million of these children. This was before the Reagan administration's budget cuts. Keep in mind, this book was written in the 1980s. This was, like I said, this was before the Reagan administration's budget cuts. Since these cuts, at least 2 million more women have fallen below the government defined poverty level, and with them, more millions of children. As of January 1985, 1 out of 4 American children lives in what is considered to be official poverty. Nearly 35.7% of the households headed by women are impoverished. Among Black families headed by women, 56.1% are impoverished. As of February 1985, there were 3 million estimated homeless people in America, a number exceeding the number of homeless during the Great Depression of the 1930s. There are now 25,000 homeless people in the streets of Chicago alone, an estimated 7,000 of these being children, and a burgeoning number of the adult homeless being women. The Chicago Physicians Task Force on Hunger in January 1985 described childhood malnutrition in that city so severe that the children suffered from anemia, hair loss, and bloating, i.e., official symptoms of starvation. They also documented an alarming increase in tuberculosis. Indeed, with the cutoff of medical funds and the closing of health clinics since 1980, tuberculosis has grown to near epidemic proportions among the poor in many major U.S. cities, especially infecting women and children. Tuberculosis is always a sign of malnutrition. The Chicago Physicians Task Force called TB an objective marker of hunger. In midwinter of January 1985, police were rounding up 600 homeless people a night from the streets of Boston. And in Washington, D.C., capital of world capitalism, there are now between 5,000 and 10,000 homeless people walking the streets. For a while, some of the homeless got warm at night by huddling over the sidewalk gratings where heat escapes from the government buildings. The Reagan administration responded to this free heat situation by spending thousands of tax dollars to build cement huts surrounded with sharp spikes around the gratings to ensure that no poor people would benefit from the escaping bureaucratic hot air. Demonstrations got the cement huts removed at more expense. Proponents of laissez-faire capitalism refer to the free enterprise system as the greatest enemy of poverty the earth has ever known. But as the free enterprise system is more and more unleashed in America in the 1980s, i.e., as it is freed from the governmental restrictions and compensatory social welfare programs specifically designed in the decades since the 1930s to ameliorate the social and economic ravages of 2 centuries of unrestricted free enterprise activity, the number of poor is increasing right here in America. Faced with the statistical evidence of the increase of poverty and real hunger in America during the past 6 years, the administration's answer is to 1, insist that poverty is not a serious problem in America, and 2, scrap all social welfare programs, and 3, turn the problem of a few unfortunates over to private charity. A few unfortunates over to private charity. This, although all the private charity organizations in America have long ago publicly stated that the load is so enormous they are not capable of handling it, even with the welfare system still running. But the final solution to the poverty problem in America is officially to deny it exists, or to blame it on lazy women and children. As Ruth Legger Savard pointed out, the poverty statistics affect more than the poor, and not only by wasting human resources. Large numbers of poor and unemployed people in a society pull the whole working class wage level downward and weaken the bargaining positions of working people vis-a-vis employers. Millions of working women in America are just one notch above the official poverty level. They must accept subsistence wages, unhealthy work conditions, and chronic on-the-job harassment for fear of losing employment altogether. Sweatshop conditions are returning to major American cities like Los Angeles, Boston, New York, where unlicensed substandard garment shops are springing up by the hundreds, where employers can get away with employing poor women up to 16 hours a day, 7 days a week without overtime, minimum wage rates, unemployment insurance, or even legal work safety conditions. All workers are threatened. The entire standard of work life plummets downward. The entire high tech electronics industry in America, the vaunted leading edge of our economic recovery, is predicated on employing large numbers of immigrant women, 40% in parentheses, in chemically hazardous jobs at average wages that are among the lowest in American industry. But these conditions are the only alternative for millions and millions of American women, short of total poverty, including homelessness. Since 1980, the American divorce rate has fallen noticeably. Fundamentalists think this means Americans have returned to God and the family, but more likely it means that American women see less and less chance for economic survival for themselves and their children outside of marriage. Since 1980, reported incidents of wife beating and child abuse have noticeably increased, i.e., the economic pressures holding all these marriages together are also increasing the violence within the American family. The average American woman works almost twice the hours and receives a little more than half the pay of the average American man. This fact has come from this fact has become a feminist cliche. If housewives were paid for their domestic work alone, they would earn $17,000 a year. This too has become a cliche. In lieu of payment, the average white middle-class American homemaker is patted on the head and praised for her priceless work. A woman's work that is so important it can't have a price tag put on it. This baloney comes from men who have deliberately constructed a world in which all power over life and death is a function of money, of ascertainable wealth, period. A world of male power that is economically established on the fact of women's unpaid labor. But millions of married women accept this baloney and the patronizing head pats because they see very clearly that unpaid labor within a marriage is still better than most of the alternatives, i.e., the effect of increasing poverty, especially of the feminization of poverty, is to force new generations of women into accepting the old traditional terms of patriarchal marriage. American mainstream feminism's offer of equality within the system becomes meaningless within a rotten system. A patriarchal fascist economic system ontologically predicated upon the exploitation of female labor cannot possibly offer huge numbers of women anything but two choices: economic enslavement inside of marriage or economic enslavement outside of marriage. A third choice is total poverty. It is the fact of women's labor that presents the most unanswerable challenge to the theoretical and practical claims of free enterprise economics. Very simply, it is the accumulated days, years, and centuries of women's unpaid or poorly paid labor that utterly refutes the astoundingly simple minded notion that hard work equals wealth. If hard work equaled wealth, all the world's women would be quite rich. But clearly, the world's women are not rich. In The Anatomy of Freedom, Reuben Morgan quotes United Nations statistics presented by UN Secretary Kurt Waldheim in his official report to the UN Commission on the Status of Women in 1982. While women represent half of the global population and a third of the labor force, they receive only 1/10 of the world income and own less than 1% of the world's property. They are also responsible for 2/3 of all the working hours on Earth. People who put in 2/3 of the world's working hours and receive in return 1/10 of the world's income should have something to say about the idea that hard work equals wealth. They should have something very interesting to say to the neoconservative enthusiasts who insist hard work is rewarded and only the lazy are poor. The bitter truth is, under 4,000 years of patriarchal exploit for profit economics, the women of the world have worked long and hard, often under the worst necrophilic conditions, to keep the human race minimally alive. In return, we receive mostly dismal statistics signifying not reward but ripoff. As Robin Morgan underscores in The Anatomy of Freedom, all those major issues labeled world problems are in fact women's problems. The world's starving millions are predominantly women and children. Some cultures traditionally give all their protein to men. In famine and other crises, Food goes first to the male armies. It is women who are expected to stay alive on nothing, to feed infants and toddlers from their bodies as well, while gathering and preparing some kind of sustenance for everyone else, usually in terrain stripped of all nourishment. Over 90% of all the world's refugees are women and children. The world's poor are overwhelmingly women and children. And this means that most of the world's health problems, the problems of illiteracy and child abuse, are also women's problems, as is the problem of old age, of being old and caring for the old. The major problems facing the world today are women's problems. Yet, as Morgan notes, the male experts, the world analyzers, the world developers, the world planners continue to list these problems in a secondary category labeled women's issues, i.e., consign them. Wait a minute, let me just say that again. The major problems facing the world today are women's problems. Yet, as Morgan notes, the male experts, the world analyzers, the world developers, the world planners continue to list these problems in a secondary category labeled women's issues, i.e., consigned to the dustbin. Even war, the glamorous male issue, is a woman's problem. For global female energy keeps going into the sustaining of biological life in the face of man's technological preoccupation with death. And it is man's preoccupation that gets all the funding. It is obsessive preparation for war that drains off all the resources of will and energy needed to continue life. It takes almost 10 months to make a human body. It takes a fraction of a millisecond to destroy one. Apparently, war-oriented males feel this gives them a technological superiority over women, although all the superiority is on the side of death. Morgan also discusses how technological development spearheaded by Western, predominantly American, male experts sets out at the very beginning to destroy third world women's traditional farming, craft, and marketing systems by turning over all the new machinery and development plans, the urban factory and rural agricultural technologies to the indigenous men. Only men are trained to use the new high-powered machinery. Further, for the convenience of the machines, land is reallocated. The women's horticultural plots confiscated and turned over to men for large-scale, often one-crop farming. Or the men are siphoned into urban factory centers, splitting out not only families, but whole cultures based on rural cooperative market systems run by women. The new industrial power is put in the hands of men, and the rural villages degenerate into company towns, virtually run by multinational corporations who even get tax credits for doing so. Morgan describes contemporary third world developmental programs as neo-colonial, merely a suave continuance of the old raw colonial style, with the developers manipulating indigenous males into bargains made between men and over the heads of women. One of the most consistent inconsistencies of man's neo-colonial approach is that where a local tradition is in the self-interest of women, such as matrifocal land ownership or a batik industry controlled for generations by females, man overrides this tradition in the name of progress. But where a local tradition is deleterious to women, in parentheses, they say genital mutilation practices as rites of passage, or protein being considered a dietary taboo for women, then man recognizes this tradition, expresses regard for it, and incorporates it into his plan for progress. Of course, this is not an inconsistency at all, but the classic imperialist ploy of dominating and manipulating a people by giving the men power over women. Ideological power backed up with technological power, whether in the form of rifles or grain harvesters or textile factories, i.e., men dominate women via superior technology. But this neo-colonial maneuver not only usurps and destroys women's ancient skills and independence, it also turns a traditionally female-based communal cooperative system into a male-dominated wage and profit system. Thus, whole, once self-sustaining, self-articulating cultures are systematically redesigned into company towns. And the males collecting the profits are not indigenous men, we may be sure, but the managerial elite of multinational corporations. Seeing this process at work again and again can reinforce women's deeply ingrained hostility to technology because in our bones we know how all machinery has been used against us as weaponry. But as Morgan points out, and as we have tried to show in our discussion of women's Neolithic culture, women developed most of today's technologies. Ceramic, textile, and food processing were all women's inventions and early industries. Medicines and drugs, writing, printing, agriculture itself was produced by women. It is not technology per se that is the enemy of women, but a specifically male dominated but a specifically male dominated use of it in a specifically male dominated system, i.e., the patriarchal, exploit for profit, fascist economic system. Women's global task today is not to fight technology, to smash the machines and return to Stone Age handwork. Rather, we must study how the most modern and helpful technologies can be used within communal cooperative systems, not to the profit of the few, but to the benefit of the many. Technologies themselves are not politically or economically biased. They can be plugged into any system. They don't have to be profit making in order to work. It is people who must reorient and redesign our heads, our hearts, and our social matrices so that the technologies can be plugged into cooperative, life sustaining systems rather than the competitive, profit and power making systems of the past 4,000 years. And this reorientation and redesign means reactivating rather than destroying women's traditional communal cooperative patterns. And this means indigenous males everywhere refusing to be co opted by the global corporate development system into betraying the traditional women's cooperative cultures, both in their practical organization and in their spiritual philosophical orientation, which was from the beginning the people first. Everywhere refers not only to men of the third world. The global corporation system is planning free trade zones for the Bronx and also for a 200-mile strip along the Mexican US border. And as Paul Virilio points out, Europe will be identified with the third world very shortly as a politically disempowered entity surviving as a colonial market and enterprise zone in the same relation to global corporate entities as Latin America is to the United States. Global means global, after all, and global control refers not only to war power, but to complete economic, social, and ideological power over every aspect of human life, with instantaneous electronic technological surveillance and enforcement. Now, this again, I say was in 1980. This was written. I mean, in some ways we have come you know a ways, right? But in some ways, I mean, this shit is like so very relevant, electronic technological surveillance and enforcement. Okay, anyway, as Morgan writes, no one would deny that developing countries can use technological support, but such support must be key to the needs of all its citizens, not aimed at buying out half of them, a feat accomplished by selling out the other half. Men worldwide must learn that every time they sell out their women or their women's communal systems, they are only buying a prolongation of colonial enslavement for themselves or neo colonial enslavement, the same specter riding a motorcycle. In his last book, A Grunch of Giants, R. Buckminster Fuller pointed out that since the early 1970s, humankind has possessed the technology to feed, clothe, shelter, sustain, and entertain all of us at a very comfortable level. The problem, Fuller said, is not the absence of the necessary and appropriate technology, but obstructions to its fair distribution and optimal use. These obstructions are created by political business and religious institutions and ideologies, which depend for their existence on maintaining these obstructions, e.g., national borders, exclusive markets, ideas of guilt and spiritual superiority as modes of both profit and identity. Technologies like earth, water, air, mineral resources belong to the human race. The obstructing institutions by possessing these manufacture and distribution as private, I'm sorry, let me say that again. Technologies like earth, water, air, and mineral resources belong to the human race. The obstructing institutions by possessing their manufacture and distribution as private property or nationalistic or ethnic property, thus are able to control human beings as manufacturers of necessities, control consumers of necessities. Thus, they are able to control human beings as manufacturers of necessities, control consumers of necessities. As Fuller and others have long observed, the capitalist system itself, the business financial investment system that feeds on human need and activity, is a parasitical rather than productive system. Business co-ops and takes credit for human invention. What the inventors of the world create, not in a vacuum, but out of the accumulated knowledge and experience of the world's human labor and discovery, and then turns around and sells these inventions at a net profit for itself, but at a gross loss to the species. Capitalism monopolizes world technology and resources, distributes them only for profit, and in fact, as a system based on calculations of greed rather than calculations of need, obstructs the existing and appropriate technologies from meeting the exigencies they would be able to meet within a radically different system of distribution and use. Fuller, certainly a master technologist, insisted that it was one, the capitalist market system, two, nationalist politics, and three, religious ideologies of guilt and punishment, ontologies of spirit versus flesh. These three obsolete factors, which were alone keeping the adequate existing technologies from being mass produced, distributed worldwide, and plugged in immediately for the greater good of all. He acknowledged this might sound utopian, but against the only and inevitable alternative of mass extermination, he offered his suggestions and calculations as hardcore realism. It is not enough for Western feminists to fight for equality within a rotten system. For large masses of women to be exploited side by side with male workers on global assembly lines, paying subsistence wages, for women to be drafted into armies side by side with men so both can fight in corrupt imperialist wars against indigenous revolutions all over the globe. This is no victory for women, nor is the entrance of a few token femmes into the managerial levels and executive boardrooms of giant corporations. Both integrations are co-optations of female energy into the maintenance of obsolete and criminal systems. Powerful systems, yes, but nonetheless obsolete and criminal, where women are allowed to share equally in their profits and weight and advantages. We also share equally in their crimes and in their obsolescence. If the Soviet state capitalist system has become criminal and ontologically rigid under pressure from American based private capitalism, this has happened largely because its ruling male elite stopped short of, in fact, reversed, a total sexual revolution, leaving patriarchal consciousness intact, while it attempted a communalist restructuring that can only succeed in terms of matrifocal consciousness based on female sexual autonomy. Today, both major world powers are locked together in a male power dance. Both systems are trapped within the terms of their own patriarchal biases. One, control and profit via war, and two, control and profit via labor exploitation, beginning with the exploitation of female I'm sorry. I don't know where that came from, but beginning with the exploitation of female reproductive labor and the dwindling resources of the earth. Continuous war and continuous energy exploitation have been the operating principles of patriarchal systems for 4,000 years, and no patriarchal system, American or Soviet, or any of their satellites, escapes the criminal stigma of these operating principles. Women must reject the constant co-optive suggestion that we have only these two choices, the man's capitalism or the man's communism. We must refute the constant diversionary suggestion that there is no precedent for a third choice. Female oriented cooperative communalism. Against 4,000 years of Bronze to Nuclear Age patriarchy, we must set at least 300,000 years of female Stone Age precedents, during which time all the fundamental technologies and industries of human life were originated and elaborated to the benefit of all life, including the psychic, meditative, spiritual technologies which have never been improved upon, but instead have been only lost, literalized, or fascistically degraded by the world's patriarchal religions. Remember that the great goddess was always a triplicity. Between all dualistic choices, all warring oppositions, stood her being, a third term which mediated and synthesized the polarities into a new thing, an epiphany, the immanence of transcendence, the transcendence of immanence. The whole purpose of studying ancient women's religion and culture is to understand the great precedents for this third term, this third alternative choice, neither the man's fascism nor the man's communism, but a radical return to the female beginning. A truly radical cooperative communalism that was at the root of human consciousness and culture. It is necessary for all of us to conceive that this female oriented creative collectivism existed so that we can begin to perceive how it can be brought into being again on this contemporary turn of the spiral. To know it existed in the past is to give its future existence not only credibility, but empowerment. We need this confidence of precedence not only as a core of spiritual vision, but as the core of our political vision. Only when we know truly and accurately what human beings have been and have done can we begin to envision both practical and numinous modes of future being and doing. William Irwin Thompson talks about the critically important relation between history, ontology, and politics. He argues that historic extrapolation from an ontology of man the terrestrial, he argues that historic extrapolation from an ontology of man the territorial possessor and aggressor leads to one kind of politics, while the extrapolation from an ontology of woman the creator and sharer of food leads to quite another. Okay. 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 In terms of the sociology of knowledge, one can say that one's vision of the origins of human culture affects one's political behavior in contemporary culture. If one believes that weapons and killings are the foundation of human culture, then one is inclined to accept a split in which technologically superior cultures move forward while inferior cultures are helped on their way toward extinction. Through triage, a new global scientific elite determines who will survive, and through sociobiology, who should be chosen to survive. If, on the other hand, one believes with Glenn Isaacs that food sharing is the primordial act which made us human, then the global crisis would generate a vision of compassion and sharing. Audrey's vision becomes the philosophical foundation and justification for a new authoritarian and technologically managed society. Isaac's vision becomes the basis for a totally different world culture of compassion, as the Buddhists say, for the suffering of all sentient beings. All of which is to say that we are what we think, and that our vision of the origin of human culture is simply another description of our perception of the present condition. The compassionate, food sharing definition of humanity, as we've shown, has precedence in the hundreds of thousands of years of matrifocal Stone Age culture. Let me say it again. The compassionate, food sharing definition of humanity, as we've shown, has precedence in the hundreds of thousands of years of matrifocal Stone Age culture. But of course, it is not a definition exemplified by women alone. Many men have embraced this definition, argued for it, propagated it, and given their lives for it. The greatest men have always embodied it. As that reasonable and mortal man Thomas Jefferson wrote in 1809, the care of human life and happiness, and not their destruction, is the first and only legitimate object of good government. Or, in the words of the Argentinian poet and novelist Julio Cortázar, the moment comes when a truth becomes clear, a truth simple as it is wonderful. That of saving oneself alone is not saving oneself, or in any case, it doesn't justify us as human beings. Next chapter, the magic flight home. In the name of God, what patriarchy has finally achieved is the completely profane world. What Western patriarchy has given us in God's name is a world wholly emptied of spirit. The holy desacralized cosmos is a recent discovery in the history of the human spirit. For the human spirit and the spiritual world existed from the beginning, as consciousness is a property of matter and evolution is the play of spirit. Let me say that again. For the human spirit and the spiritual world existed from the beginning, as consciousness is a property of matter and evolution is the play of spirit. By abstracting spirit from flesh, by utterly demonizing the physical world and woman as its source, patriarchy has almost destroyed the home of spirit, which is sacred earth and all flesh. In its place, patriarchy has built a sordid wasteland of material products, profit and power systems, and death machines, the inevitable result of 4,000 years of militant life hatred and cynical mercantilism. Our earthly bodies themselves are mechanized and pornographized, offered up for sale as though indeed we had no souls, but existed only as exploitable units in nihilistic market and state systems. Whether we are women or men, we are all for sale in the modern world, all whores for our own survival. In the final insult, the religious fundamentalists tell us the price tags attached to our necks and groins are not travesties at all, but come from God. A God who somehow in their mercenary sermonizing becomes the original capitalist. And of course, they are right. Their God was the first to own, control, and exploit the human female as productive property, as a head of cattle, i.e., capital. Today, as it Today, as at its beginnings, patriarchy pretends to teach us about souls and offers us spiritual salvation. In truth, patriarchy has never done anything but steal and exploit the human soul, just as, from its beginnings, in mass bloodshed, repression, and plunder, it has for 4 millennia robbed and exploited the energies of Earth and her creatures. By setting itself against evolution, i.e., against the continuous epiphany of biological consciousness, patriarchy has set itself against life itself. For 4,000 years, it has plundered, pushed, and plotted its way toward the complete construction of a substitute life, an ersatz Earth, a la global shopping mall, a man-made mechanical paradise. Ignoring, denying, and insulting the cosmic laws of everything growing and alive, it develops mechanoid specializations in every sphere, supposedly for our benefit. It destroys or overrides integrated living processes to turn out metalloid and plastoid things, deadened things, which correspondingly humanoid things are supposed to spend our eerie lives buying and consuming. But we should know by now that human life engineered as an extension of a mechanoid vision is to the benefit of no one except the owners of the machine. The industries and technologies of both Western capitalism and Soviet statism cannot exist without earth rape, gross pollution of the environment, exterminations of vast numbers of animals and humans, of jungles and forests and grasslands, massive die-outs of terrestrial and oceanic life forms, because systematic destruction is a function of the original patriarchal premise, exploit for power and profit. What can be done under patriarchy to one female body can be done under world patriarchy to the entire body of Earth. The pornographic images of women trussed up in chains and barbed wire, of female flesh bruised and bloodied and beaten raw, are really our species' maps of the mutilated earth, who for 4,000 years has been tortured for power and profit. The deadness of pornography is the deadness of the landscape created by patriarchy, in which nothing lives that is not hideously deformed, controlled, manipulated for the voyeur's eye, bound up for use. In such a landscape, the classic patriarchal paranoia becomes well justified. Earth becomes indeed an ugly, hellish place in which ugly, hellish things can be done to us. Mother Earth can refuse to respond to our need and instead begin to match our destructiveness with her own destructions. Hello. In response, the man says not to worry and regales us with his plans for a wholly programmed artificial life. It will be such a great improvement over the natural life, which was so encumbered with mess and error. Grass will be replaced with astroturf. Hearts will be replaced with computers. On the market right now are fluffy, purring, meowing robot pussycats, which can do all the cute things real house cats can do. Catch mice without the cost and bother. In fact, everything can be replaced, including us, with those good, efficient, obedient, non unionized, thoroughly dreamless machines. For those still attached to the sentiment of flesh, biological engineers are probing inward with an eye to reprogramming our DNA to eliminate perhaps our varieties as well as our mistakes, all with a vision of making us more perfect, which classically means more usable within the terms of specific systems. For those who still gaze at stars, the man is launching out in all directions, eager to carry all these circuit boards of God to other planets, other galaxies. In all the plans to colonize space, there is a remarkable but predictable absence of any profound urge to contradict or challenge the extant patriarchal definition of the meaning of life. Moon and planets will become colonized resource stations. Male and female astronauts or the androids that replace them will communicate with each other, with earthlings and with galaxies in only the most linear, digitalized, and computational language. Regardless of their siliconic sophistication, the more humans rely on machines, the more we become extensions of machines. The mechanoid processes meant to free us are instead defining us. In his boyish enthusiasm for, I'm sorry, in his boyish enthusiasm for his own inventiveness, the man has once again thoroughly missed the point, which is this: only fully living beings can fully experience life. For those of us left earthbound, we live on a planet undergoing prolonged torture, that is, a huge, fully sensate creature being subjected to an infinite variety of murders. She is dynamited, she is strip mined, she is gassed and sprayed with chemicals, she is riddled with whales seeking oil, her blood, determined to suck out the last black drop. Her brain, which is the sea, is dumped full of poison. The air through which she breathes becomes a thick, toxic cloud. All the heavy metals and radioactive elements, once distributed sparsely throughout her body, are now leached into her bones, into her fleshly soil, into her womb, stored in lethal concentrations, drunk by roots, groundwater, tongues. They will pass down a more than necessary death to her remaining creatures for generations. A humanity starved of energy eats its own mother. Meanwhile, nature's free and relatively wholesome, holistic energies of sun, wind, thermal heat, water, moon tidal, human, and organic compost are ignored, rejected. Not that they are non feasible, but that manhood in the Western world is defined as large scale exploitation rather than as local cooperation. The Western world, as we all know, is a total junkie, both in its compulsive addiction to consumption and in its foul methods of disposing its waste. The number one drug problem in America, surely, is the 24-hour-a-day addiction of the average person to 100 times more artificial energy, from sugar to electricity, from mass entertainment to the bomb, than any healthy human being could ever want or need. And like any junkie threatened with a cutoff of supply, America, the Western world generally, can think and act in murderous ways. The Western world feels it is constantly threatened with having its physical power sources cut off. In response, if current political economic trends are indicative, it will euphemistically institute and maintain a total dictatorship of the globe in order to maintain access to energy sources which are, by most accounts, already dwindling. The alternative for the West is a complete change of worldview and lifestyle. But how is such a total change possible within the terms of patriarchal ontology? The Western patriarchies cannot change in any radical way because they are ontologically based on a cutting off of human roots. The patriarchal West cannot solve its energy problems because our minds and spirits were long ago cut off from the real source of energy or creative power. This is the sexual spiritual source of cosmic ecstasy, which patriarchy has denied in favor of manipulative, moralistic, and rationalistic energies. Mm, mm, mm. And as moral and rational energies themselves dwindle, within a lingering patriarchal framework, only the most decadent, bizarre, and vicious energies seem to erupt in their place. These criminal energies do not result from the absence of patriarchy as the fundamentalists preach. Rather, they are the corrupt residues and grotesque spasms of the dying patriarchy himself. Evil is that which prevents the unfolding of the one. According to this definition, surely all of patriarchal society is evil. Even in its death throes, it attempts to pit us all against each other as economic enemies, as political enemies, as racial enemies, as religious enemies, worker against worker, white against dark, man against man. Man against woman, belief against belief, as patriarchal systems begin and end by instigating competitiveness for survival, i.e., by trying to make communalism, mutual cooperation, impossible. Ironically, even the minimal cooperation required to keep patriarchal systems going seems to be rapidly dwindling. Against the unfolding of the one, against the revelation of our oneness, patriarchy schemes ferociously to pit us against each other, like many rats in a small cage, like many hungry dogs thrown only one bone. If we have to keep surviving at one another's expense, we will, of course, never learn or never remember how to live in the hope of one another's well being. Patriarchy thrives on human discord. As a system, it strives to co opt us all, buy and sell us all, one against the other. At the very heart of this divide and conquer strategy, we must remember it is the colonization of the indigenous female by the imperial male, the usurpation and exploitation of the original female collective by the Bronze Age patriarchal profiteer. Among many third world people still fighting their way out of the rubble of advanced colonialism, and among political minorities in the West generally, there is terrific suspicion and hostility towards suggestions of any spiritual solution to the world's real problems. This anger and doubt is understandable and thoroughly justified. Franz Fanon wrote in The Wretched of the Earth, for centuries, they have stifled almost the whole of humanity in the name of a so called spiritual experience. They, of course, refers to the Christian West. The so called spiritual experience has been that of a dominating European and American male elite with their auxiliary wives and families, which has for 3 centuries proceeded to realize its pathological lust for individual power and enrichment at the expense of the rest of the world. Western patriarchy has plundered, raped, co opted, ripped off, brutalized, and massacred lavishly, always in the name of God. God is always available to justify what cannot otherwise be justified. The Holy Bible itself is the first written example of this phenomena. Western Christians throughout their long, gory history have convinced themselves that the God of the Bible chose them to be spiritual imperialists. They have convinced themselves that this God virtually gave them the entire earth to use, to control, to profit from, and in the final insult, to missionize, to teach, spirit to, through a rifle barrel if necessary. It is a kind of dematerialized fairy tale Christians have long and wistfully told themselves, and the living earth is not real anyway. So God gave it to them to abstract into wealth. which is quite real. The entire planet, with its exotic varieties of peoples, lands, animals, and resources, has been viewed by Western Christianity as little more than raw material, just waiting to be appropriated and reprocessed by enterprising religious men into an ego enhancing experience. Because clearly, the God in whose name the West has terrorized the rest of the world has not been a God of spirit, not ever, but a God of inflated patriarchal ego. An ego so full of itself, it has always been able to spiritualize, i.e., rationalize, as divinely ordained, the most blatant robberies and repulsive crimes. The biblically derived capitalist spiritual experience, in particular, has never been an adventure of spirit, but an indulgence of extreme individualism and self righteousness in pursuit of personal profit, personal enhancement, always at the expense of the whole world. For only ego experiences end up amassing profit, i.e., acts of alienation. Genuine spiritual experiences always communal, i.e., an act of communication. Just as Western biblical spirituality has served to rationalize imperialism, it has simultaneously served to stifle political criticism and activity against imperialism. It has been spiritual to colonize, brutalize, and plunder, but not spiritual to talk about it, i.e., spirituality has long been reified into an upper and middle class euphemistic process in which it is considered not polite to discuss the origins of one's wealth. The origins of wealth, of course, are always very bloody, i.e., not nice. In the name of refined sensibility, aka spirituality, aka abstractness, the pursuit of bloody truth is discouraged. The paradigm for this class evasion of the blood origins of wealth lies in the patriarchal evasion of the blood origins of life. Patriarchy shamelessly colonizes, exploits, and brutalizes the female body, and then censors open discussion and criticism of this process in the name of decency, polite society, civilized discourse, et al. ETAL. In both cases, the pretense of spirit is used to cover up the fact of blood. And so, in all those parts of the world that have been ravaged by the Western Christian imperialist experience, spirituality has a well deserved reputation as the emblem of total hypocrisy. This reputation continues into some new age or counterculture attempts at spirituality. In particular, many activists undergoing political burnout have made 180-degree turns to immerse themselves in apolitical spiritual pursuits, thus reinforcing the euphemistic patriarchal tradition that spirit is above politics. The left hand shouldn't know what the right hand is doing. Profit 6 days a week and go to church on Sunday. All being psychological devices to allow people to enjoy the fruits of patriarchal profit systems while avoiding responsibility for their sanguine roots. They all mean don't look too closely at the origins of your wealth, including the wealth of spiritual privilege. For it is true that all spiritual exercise in the Western world is performed on a cushion of wealth. If not one's personal wealth, then the wealth of one's surrounding culture. And this wealth has been accumulated at the world's expense. For Westerners to leave politics and submerge themselves in apolitical or transpolitical spiritual disciplines may or may not serve personal needs and goals. On the global level, it is merely a continuance of the patriarchal imperialist trick of spiritualizing one's wealth and privilege by not looking too closely at their bloody roots. Moreover, this disappearing trick is a lie. Politics is in and of the world, and nobody leaves the world. Spiritual people leave politics only in the sense that rich people leave poverty, i.e., by being able to afford to fly off to some other place where they won't have to look at it. But poverty, like politics, is in and of the contemporary world. Because most people live in poverty and in politics, not by choice, but by brute force, they have become ontological conditions for the entire world. Nobody escapes them. Some people have the illusion of escaping them for more or less prolonged periods of time, just as during the incessant plagues, wars, and political upheavals of the early Middle Ages, rich people barricaded themselves in well-stocked castles while hordes of the sick and starving banged and died at their gates. The feudal rich had the illusion that they could survive as islands of life surrounded by a rising sea, suffering. Let me say that again. The feudal rich had the illusion they could survive as islands of life surrounded by a rising sea of suffering and death. But not for long. In most cases, the castles were broken into and the privileged few dragged out to scream and die like everyone else. Just so, in a political world, isolated or separatist spiritual solutions are doomed. Faced with the pain and challenge of this realization, many spiritually oriented people opt for the spiritually reactionary explanations of the world's suffering. Example, that God makes some people poor so that others can learn something from them. That poverty and pain are karmic situations brought on by one's behaviors in past lives. That one chooses one's life absolutely, and that some people choose to suffer, etc. All these explanations are spiritual versions of blaming the victim. They derive from patriarchal religious systems which were purposely designed to rationalize hierarchies, injustices, and the status quo. All patriarchal systems are self-justifying, and the mind dwelling within these systems is capable of monstrous rationalizations in order to keep these tautologies intact. These modes of explaining other people's sufferings are, in a very real way, acts of human sacrifice. Faced with a choice or a challenge to our religious mindset, we are willing to sacrifice living human beings, their problems, and their pain in order to keep our worldviews intact. We are literally sacrificing people to our gods. The core of this is patriarchal ontology, which separates spirit from matter and proceeds to deny the reality of life in the name of some abstract God or some life explaining ontological system. All spiritually oriented people are prone to this trap, and it is a trap we must beware. When our desire and capacity to see the world as a sacred gestalt becomes, on another level, a monstrous justification of what must not be justified. When fundamentalists and some evangelicals claim that the hydrogen bomb comes from God and that global annihilation via World War III will be a fulfillment of Revelation, a fulfillment not to be avoided at all costs but to be yearned for, in fact, as the prophesied rapture, most spiritual people are appalled. But many of these same people will turn about and accept without critique Krishna's justification of war in the Bhagavad Gita, where the God tells Arjuna to ride into battle and slay all his relatives without remorse or hesitation, because after all, they are all illusions anyway, and already dead and never born, merely the spinnings of Maya. One myth is prettier to us, i.e., more exotic, than the other, but in truth, what is the real difference between one patriarchal rationalization of hell and the other? All rationalizations of holy war are not spiritual. They are, in fact, patriarchal, and we must recognize the difference. By the same token, all spiritual rationalizations of continuous poverty, injustice, and suffering are not spiritual at all, but are, in fact, patriarchal political justifications of the status quo, and we must know the difference. Because women's spirituality in the Western world has been, or has often seemed to be, a cultural luxury of mostly white middle class women, it too has been accused, quite justly, of lacking a political consciousness, or at least of lacking a political reference. On another level, many lesbian and even here, I'm sorry, on another level, many lesbian and even hetero feminists who are into the goddess have opted for cultural political separatism. They have left politics and political solutions, that is, by blaming the world's problems on men and then refusing to have anything more to do with the man's world, i.e., let him clean up his own mess. The glaring problem with this separatist solution is that the man's world is still filled with a majority population of women and children. It is women and children doing most of the suffering out there, and to turn one's back on the man's world is to turn one's back on them. A genuine understanding of the goddess would not allow us to do this. A true ontological experience of the Great Mother and of the complete physical as well as spiritual bonding together of all life on earth would not allow us to turn our backs on the man's world, for we are in and of that world now, and its suffering is an extension of us, as we are an extension of it. In a true reliving of the world's first religion, we can make no distinctions between the life of the spirit and the life of the flesh, for they are one. And so we can make no separation between spirituality and politics. We are this world. We cannot leave it. We can only work to transform it as we transform ourselves in acts of evolution and revolution. The genius of Michael Foucault surely was that he showed us so clearly and so precisely how politics is everything that happens to the body. On earth, mind and spirit are definitively embodied. The notion that mind and spirit can be abstracted from the body is a patriarchal lie. And a continuance of this lie is the notion that we can indulge in a spirituality that is above politics, that somehow floats above the agony of this present earth like a little blissed out cloud. The spirit is within a body. It is the conscious experience of process within that body. And the spirit evolves or is obstructed in its evolution depending on the body's experience of its material environment. It is patriarchy that devalues and disconnects the body from the spirit in order to make that body's energy accessible for exploitation. It is patriarchy that devalues and disconnects the body from the spirit in order to make that body's energy accessible for exploitation. A feminist spirituality must begin with the fact of being alive as a biological body on a living and conscious biological planet. This is the human ontological condition. This is the condition of all human evolution and all creative human activity. Those who embrace spirituality as an escape from politics, as a transcendence of political exigencies, simply do not understand what feminist spirituality means at its root. The joining of the conscious body and the conscious spirit in the ongoing epiphany of experienced evolution. Whatever represses or deforms the body's experience of itself also represses and deforms the spirit's self experience, i.e., God does not want millions of human beings to starve and suffer and die so that a select few can undergo a spiritual experience. Nor does the goddess live solely in elite separatist retreats, dancing naked in the piney woods under a white and well-fed moon. The goddess at this moment is starving to death in refugee camps with a skeletal child clutched to her dry nipples. The goddess at this moment is undergoing routine strip and squat search inside an American prison. The goddess is on welfare, raising her children in a ghetto next to a freeway interchange that fills their blood cells and neurons with lead. Wait a minute. Let me say this again. Okay. I.e., God does not want millions of human beings to starve and suffer and die so that a select few can undergo a spiritual experience. Nor does the goddess live solely in elite separatist retreats, dancing naked in the piney woods under a white and well-fed moon. The goddess, at this moment, is starving to death in refugee camps with a skeletal child clutched to her dry nipples. The goddess, at this moment, is undergoing routine strip and squat search inside an American prison. The goddess is on welfare, raising her children in a ghetto next to a freeway interchange that fills their blood cells and neurons with lead. The goddess is an 8-year-old being used for the special sexual thrills of visiting businessmen in a Brazilian brothel. The goddess is patrolling with a rifle slung over her shoulder, trying to save a revolution in Nicaragua. The goddess is Winnie Mandela in South Africa saying, "Don't push me," i.e., the goddess is the world. The goddess is in the world, and nobody can escape the world. We know this, but we forget it. In this world, at this point, no political revolution is sustainable if it is not also a spiritual revolution, a complete ontological birth of new beings out of the old. Equally, no spiritual activity deserves respect if it is not at the same time a politically responsible, i.e., responsive activity. As Julio Cortázar says, the moment comes when a truth becomes clear, a truth simple as it is wonderful. That of saving oneself alone is not saving oneself, or in any case, it doesn't justify us as human beings. In this world, at this point, we are at the apogee of the patriarchal project of separating flesh from spirit. E.g., some spokesmen, or examples, some spokesmen for the patriarchal view are actually telling us that they might have to launch World War III, even if that means annihilating the world in order to save the American way, i.e., our Christian capitalist souls. This thinking represents the outcome of 4,000 years of patriarchal attempts to abstract spiritual from material existence. The only meaningful political direction left now is synonymous with the only meaningful spiritual direction left now, towards the conscious refusion of the spirit and the flesh. This radical step might appear to be a step backward, but in our movement along a spiral, it is in fact a step forward to the same place we began, but on the path of a larger circle of consciousness. This time it will be a global consciousness of our global oneness, and it will realize itself on a very sophisticated technological stage with perhaps a total merger of psychic and electronic activity. When Steve Biko defined the vision of Black consciousness in Africa as a quest for true humanity, as a desire to define human beings as ends in ourselves, not as a means for technological development, not as mere units or functions of this economic system or that political system, not as an extension of a broom or pushable buttons on machines, but as the determination of the Black to rise and attain the envisaged self. He was articulating a spiritual vision as well as a political vision, and his articulation must be applied to all the world's people. The envisaged self is the next stage in human evolution, and it will be born explicitly from the refusion of experienced spirit and experienced flesh, not as a means toward any externally established end, but as a consciously perceived process of evolution unfolding itself. The primary urge of patriarchy has been to control and repress life towards some profitable end rather than to allow this self perceiving unfolding to occur. All genuine and successful revolts against patriarchy will be conjoined spiritual political revolts, and they will occur with the organic inevitability of unfolding evolution. This is why the great political revolutionaries who end up being killed, assassinated for one ostensible reason or another, are inevitably the people who most appeal to the spirit. They are the vanguard of the inevitable refusion of the spiritual and material worlds. And even though they sometimes do not realize this themselves, their presences, their beings vibrate with this ontologically matriarchal refusion. For it is only within the goddess that sexual flesh and conscious cosmic spirit can become one. Steve Biko was murdered by the South African Security Police in 1977. As the future rapidly unfolds, there will undoubtedly appear more and more female martyrs of the conjoined flesh and spirit, until the entire world understands that this is the next inevitable evolutionary step that all must take. The fundamentalists have confused us and have attracted many confused people with their commercial revival of the old mechanistic, moralistic God. They have successfully integrated their literalist biblical God with the resurgent neoconservative economics and politics, quite brazenly offering the patriarchal cause of so many world problems as the reborn solution. While people all over the world, especially young people, are risking and giving their lives to fight for the envisaged self, a true humanity, the American fundamentalist preachers and politicians are trying very hard to make humanism a dirty word. This is the result of their Bronze Age religious heritage, in which everyday fleshly, earthly reality had to be demonized in order to make spirit the property of an elite few. Also, perhaps the humanism they see in their own mirrors is not worthy of much respect. The secular humanist liberals have also contributed to the problem, striving to maintain the constitutional separation of church and state. They have in past decades constructed program after program, government funded housing, food commodities, food stamps, job training and retraining programs, etc., in which the minimal needs of the body are met, along with a massive disregard for the human spirit. Liberal programs failed because their built-in spiritual deadness. Like many Marxists and socialists, American liberals fell into the trap of confusing spirituality with religion. Because we have all been trained by 4,000 years of patriarchal dichotomizing to believe that being spiritual is qualitatively different from being human, we refuse to see the spirit at work in so many third world humanist political movements. For the same reason, so many people are overawed by the expensive, if tacky, hyper religiosity of the modern television preachers or salesmen of God. The soaring, glassy churches, the golden Bibles, the patriotically positive teeth and perfect hairdos, choirs of shimmeringly otherworldly polyester. This definitely isn't real life, so it must be spiritual. When the fundamentalists revive biblical arrogance in their claim to have a denominational hotline to God, this preposterousness is believed by millions and millions of people. This is how far we have fallen, disconnected from our primal recognition of spirit in all living things. Blatantly commercialist power-mongering can claim to be conversation with the cosmic spirit and be believed. True humanism, primal spirituality, and the energy of evolution must join together in a conscious force to tell the truth about God and life. The truth is that God is not in a book, holy, golden, or otherwise. God is not in a church, a cathedral, a synagogue, a mosque. God is not cemented inside any man-made theological system or elitist cultural architecture. God is definitely not bursting neck veins of righteously profitable baloney at you from the TV screen. God is not for sale, even to the highest bidder, no matter how much it indulges in nationalistic flag waving and the bellicosity of world power. God is the universe. We are all now living inside the body of God. There is nowhere to go to get there. We are already here. There is nowhere to go to get outside of God. There is just a forgetting of this truth. It is impossible not to be living right now and always within God's body. It is only possible to be aware or unaware of this fact. Religions that try to block or repudiate our awareness of this cosmic fact must themselves be repudiated. Religions that try to cut us off from our long evolutionary past, moralistic, mechanistic dogmas that deny our billions of years of passionate, heroic survival, crawling up from the first cell through the genetic adventures of algae, fish, land plants, insects, reptiles, birds, mammals, to the complex human consciousness of now, must themselves be denied. Such religions give us a cardboard definition of life that keeps us always lonely and alienated, cut off from the creative energy and integrity of the earth's biological imagination. Religions that curse and distort our past as rooted in some dark, savage evil, which they say can only be expiated by lifetimes of guilt and suffering, must be repudiated. They cut us off from ourselves, from our origins, and our destiny as creative children of an infinitely creative universe. To reduce us to something sinful is to reduce us to something exploitable. Religions of guilt, sin, and fear tell lies to us about who we are in order to mechanize and exploit our beings. Religious systems that support any kind of dominance, submission, social structures, primary religions that preach holy hierarchies based on sex, race, caste, ethnic or religious, economic or political distinctions must be utterly repudiated. Such religions are not visions of God, but vampire machineries that keep themselves empowered by eating our human energies and our souls. By reinforcing primate mechanisms on our unique human species, they obstruct and deform our evolution. They are counter evolutionary. All religions that attempt to explain human suffering, injustice, hunger, and poverty as manifestations of God's will must be totally repudiated. Such religions do not speak for God, they merely reiterate patriarchal rationalizations for the status quo. Such rationalizations are all self-serving for the people in power and therefore lies told to the rest of us. Biology makes mistakes. It does not lie. We need a new global spirituality, an organic spirituality that belongs innately to all of us as the children of Earth, a genuine spirituality that utterly refutes the moralistic, manipulative, patriarchal systems, the mechanistic religions that seek to divide us, that control and oppress us by successfully dividing us. We need a spirituality that acknowledges our earthly roots as evolutionary and sexual beings, just as we need an ontology that acknowledges Earth as a conscious and spiritual being. We need this organic global spirituality because we are ready to evolve as a globally conscious species. We are at the point where we must evolve or die. In a chilling book published in 1972 called The 20th Century Book of the Dead, Gil Elliott compiled statistics of all the ways we know how to die. In the 20th century alone, according to Elliott, there have been 110 million man-made deaths, including 62 million by various forms of privation, like death camps, slave labor, forced marches, imprisonment. There were 46 million from guns and bombs, and 2 million from chemicals. We are living in a world that practices the politics of death. And these numbers are 15 years old. Add all the wars, political murders, man-made famines since 1972. It is patriarchy that practices the politics of death. Included in these figures should be the actual deaths, perhaps all the living deaths, of all those millions of women forced, of all those millions of women forced by patriarchal religious systems into continuous breeding of continuous raw material for all this continuous murder and dying. And also the vast numbers of us who will die before this century is over because of patriarchal economic systems, chemical and radiation pollution of our food, water, and air. The deaths that are in us now, perhaps, the deaths that are in our children. Add finally the deaths of an entire species if we do not learn before the end of the 20th century to evolve out of the politics of death into the politics of living, the political art of living, the spiritual art of being alive. For from now on out, so for from now on in, genuine global spiritual awareness will be the vanguard of all successful human revolution. Political revolutions that do not follow an organic, terrestrial, cosmic, spiritual vision will end up in more patriarchal death. Wait a minute. Let me just, because this was like, she just channeling some shit. Okay, let me say that again. So the political art of living, the spiritual art of being alive. For from now on out, and then in parentheses they say from now on in, genuine global spiritual awareness will be the vanguard of all successful human revolution. Political revolutions that do not follow an organic, terrestrial, cosmic, spiritual vision will end up in more patriarchal death. Religious revivals based on obsolete patriarchal ontologies will only end in massive political deaths, the obscenities of holy war. We are really in a trap. We must evolve or die. Clearly, patriarchal systems will be the mode of our death. What could be the mode of our evolution? Paul Virilio speaks in Pure War about chronopolitics and the distribution of time. Quote, politics is no longer in space and geospace, but in time. No longer geopolitics, but chronopolitics, Organization, prohibitions, interruptions, orders, powers, structurings, subjections are now in the realm of temporality. And that's where resistance should be if we fight in space instead of fighting in time. End quote. We will not find the enemy because the enemy does not exist in space, but in time, 4,000 years ago. We are about to destroy each other and the world because of profound mistakes made in the Bronze Age patriarchal ontology, mistakes about the nature of being, about the nature of human being in the world. Evolution itself is a time process, seemingly a relentlessly linear unfolding, but biology also dreams, and in its dreams and waking visions, it outleaps time as well as space. It experiences prevision, clairvoyance, telepathy, synchronicity. Thus, we have what has been called a magical capacity built into our genes. It is built into the physical universe. Synchronicity is a quantum phenomena. The tachyon is consciousness, which can move faster than light. So, built into our biological physical selves, evolving linearly through time and space, is an authentically magical capacity to move spirally, synchronously, multisensorily, simultaneously, back and forth, up and down, in and out through all time and space. And our DNA is a genetic memory going back through time to the first cell and beyond, back through space to the Big Bang, the cosmic egg, and before that. To evolve, then, to save ourselves from species extinction, we can activate our genetic capacity for magic. We can go back in time to our pre patriarchal consciousness of human oneness with the earth. This memory is in our genes. We have lived it, it is ours. This we know. The earth does not belong to man, man belongs to the earth. This we know. All things are connected like the blood which unites one family. All things are connected. Whatever befalls the earth befalls the sons of earth. Man did not weave the web of life, he is merely a strand in it. Whatever he does to the web, he does to himself. These were the words of Chief Seattle in 1852, but they are not Indian words alone of one century or another. They are an articulation of all human memory. They are our global memory, as we all recede backward through the Christian era, through the Bronze Age, through the Neolithic, through the Stone Age consciousness of Cro-Magnon and Neanderthal, through the primates, mammals, birds, reptiles, starfish, algae, to the first cell. By going back to our clear knowledge that the earth does not belong to us, but rather we belong to the earth, as the cosmos does not belong to us, but we belong in the cosmos, we can also leap forward to that time when we know with equal clarity that we all belong together, belong equally with one another on the earth, which is our mother and our home, within a universe that is eternally God's body and our home. Such words as Chief Seattle's are not moral sentiments or emotional wishes. They are statements of cosmic law, of biological and physical law. Our consciousness is a property of our biological being. At the deepest levels of biological and of physical being, all consciousness in the universe is inextricably linked in a galactic network or web work of mutual awarenesses and mutually interchanging just thoughts. This mutual interaction may be described as the brain of God, in which all thoughts are living realities. This is where we live, either mutually evolving or mutually dying, just as all thoughts either realize themselves or die. Within such a living and dying cosmos, how can we make rational distinctions between spirit and flesh, between spiritual systems and political systems, and economic systems and social systems? Clearly, they are all bound together as interacting thoughts. And therefore, such words as Chief Seattle's are also statements of political, social, and economic law. They tell us that within such a cosmically extenuated webwork of mutually interacting and intersensing thoughts, profit can never be a good word, nor can individualism in pursuit of profit be a wholesome or a sane activity. Profit is always at the expense of the whole world. The isolated individual does not exist. Personal profit is an illusion of imbalance, and all rebalancing involves massive repercussion. The Western biblical capitalist world's Individualistic denial of the interconnected webwork of all existence has not, could never make that webwork non-existence. It has only made its global reality increasingly painful. We are all locked in together, interlocked in mind, body, and soul together. The tremor of pain of one will eventually touch all and become all. The degree of pain being experienced in the world today is very close to the point of global implosion. If we do not blow each other up with explosions of mutual fear and hatred, we will collapse inward in an implosion of mutually inflicted isolation and pain. As we are all connected together, there is nowhere else we can go. Whatever we do, the repercussions of our present situation will be global. The earth is implacably round. We can change our thoughts, however. Evolution begins in the brain of any creature who experiences a need to evolve. Species can make quantum leaps of change when a threshold number of them experience the need to change. Geneticists can speak of random mutation, but in fact, gene mutations are reflections or reflexes of perceived needs within a species. Biology can make mistakes, but not because it is unconscious. Biology is profoundly conscious and profoundly responsive to thought and to perceived need. Let me say that again. Biology is profoundly conscious. Biology is profoundly conscious and profoundly responsive to thought and to perceived need. As a species, we must attain that threshold number of conscious beings who perceive totally our need to evolve quickly and the optimal direction of that evolution. To do this, we must experience the spiritual as well as physical oneness of our species. Patriarchal religious, economic, and political systems are based upon the systematic inculcation of our human and irreparable differences of sex, of color, of caste and class, of religion and nation and geographical region. The constant exacerbation of these differences prevents us from attaining that common consciousness we need as a species in order to bring about our own evolution. We must remember the chemical connections between ourselves and the stars, between the beginning and now. We must remember and reactivate the primal consciousness of oneness between all living things. That's it. We must remember and reactivate the primal consciousness of oneness between all living things. We must return to that time in our genetic memory, in our dreams, when we were one species born to live together on earth as her magic children. These are the things human beings have known for most of our time on earth. For at least 500,000 years of human time, we have known them. For about 5 billion years of earth time, we have known them. For a good 13 billion years of galactic time, we have known them. And no doubt longer than that. Set against this long galactic, terrestrial, and human time of knowing our oneness, the past 4,000 years of patriarchy's institutional and doctrinal denial of our oneness, once we see it for what it was, will appear a mere aberration. Just a brief forgetting. Respell the world. Last chapter, Respell the world. Witches cast spells, not to do evil, but to promote changes of consciousness. Witches cast spells as acts of redefinition. To respell the world means to redefine the root of our being. It means to redefine us and therefore change us by returning us to our original consciousness of magical evolutionary processes. This consciousness is within us, in our biology and in our dreams. It works on subliminal levels, whether or not we are aware of it, because it is the energy of life and imagination. When we are aware of it, it works for us as the energy of destiny, and it is powerful with the genuine power of biological life and cosmic imagination. Perhaps ancient women had access to psychic and physical powers we have forgotten. Ancient people of both sexes living under the Stone Age Great Mother, like those remaining of Earth's primal people today, had magical powers of telepathy, clairvoyance, precognition, teletransportation, of firewalking and shape changing, of healing and building, not because such powers were pagan superstitions or of the devil, but because they are natural powers of the earth. We know that the psychic, physical, spinal techniques of illumination used by yogis and mystics, technical powers that lie dormant within all of us, were first developed by women as natural modes of communication within the larger self, the earth, and the cosmos. During the later Paleolithic and throughout the Neolithic, sexual and spiritual powers were fused through the techniques of meditation, use of natural hallucinogens, and the spiraling mandalic dances of creation dissolution within the great caves, labyrinths, and stone circles. The energies generated by these techniques became power used to the benefit of all, which is the only way power can be safely used. Ancient legends speak of the winged radiance of those who have achieved the dynamic equilibrium, the ecstatic union of the currents, which is the description of those who have raised evolutionary energy in the form of Kundalini, the cosmic serpent, up through the spinal world tree of all manifest being until it reaches the highest chakra of the human mind, becoming winged illumination. These beings are called the undivided ones, or the original Gynandrous consciousness. With such powers, perhaps mountains could be moved, truly great earth mounds could be built, great stones lifted and transported for miles, underground temples carved out of rock without the use of metal tools, i.e., great acts of physical construction could be performed without force or slave labor as expressions of a common consciousness and a common will. More important, acts of mental construction were performed which allowed people to live together harmoniously in meaningful and exciting intercommunication with all the creatures of Earth, Earth herself, and the energy beings of moon, sun, planets, and the stars. The time when the mountains sang and the rivers clapped hands was perhaps that numinous terrestrial time when all human beings were able to live harmoniously and consciously together as magic children within the living body of the cosmos. Perhaps we do not know. We can only look at the evidence and imagine. We know only what we can imagine. We know only that we can imagine. That we can imagine, as no other creature on earth can do, signifies our uniqueness, both its quality and its purpose. We are imagining animals. We are the ones who participate in the earth's evolutionary process of imagination. For what is every manifest life form and activity on earth if not the product of earth's imagination? Imagination, which is a form of memory moving both forward and backward in time, i.e., the creative process itself. Perhaps the greatest harm patriarchy has done to us is to stifle, co opt, and deform our powers of imagination. Moralisms, dualistic dogmas, repressive prohibitions block our imagination at its source, which is the fusion of sexual and spiritual energies. Patriarchal religions keep this fusion from happening. Imagination dies and is replaced by mechanical linear thought patterns, i.e., indoctrination. Human beings, crippled in our imaginations or no longer able to live in the terrain of dreams, are human beings undergoing indoctrination, exploitation, colonization. Soon, the only way to get there anymore is via drugs, drunkenness, madness, or vicariously through the art and entertainment media. Patriarchy is an anti evolutionary and an anti magic force. By cutting us off from our long evolutionary history, and in particular by dishonestly teaching us that our pre patriarchal ancestors were immoral savages or stupid, unrealized beings whose lives were only nasty, brutish, and short. It blocks our access to our own blood history. It cuts us off from millions of years of creative evolutionary energy stored up in our genes, our genetic memories. Mhm. Mm, mm, mm. Well, I might as well say it again, okay? It cuts us off from millions of years of creative evolutionary energy stored up in our genes, our genetic memories, the powerhouses of imagination. It lies to us about who we are by telling us lies about who we were. It changes us from magical to sinful in order to make us believe we need patriarchy to save us from our own selves. By cutting us off from magic as a natural property of Earth, as a conscious form of biological energy, patriarchy further tries to make us dependent upon its mechanical systems and definitions as the only modes of life that work. In its denial of magic, patriarchy creates objectivity as the only legitimate mode of knowledge. Objectivity, as we've said, is a spectator sport based upon the illusion that the observer is outside the phenomena being observed. The objective observer denies his participation in the observed phenomena by virtually killing it, by making it into a dead thing. Thus, all objective information is analogous to autopsy studies done on a corpse. Patriarchy has tried to render and redefine the entire earth and all its creatures as dead things in order to sustain its pretense of possessing objective information about all of us. Objective information, as Foucault has also shown, is merely a tool of control and exploitation. It is one of the modes of illegitimate power, otherwise known as profit. Subjectivity, we must know, is the only state of experience in the universe. The only state of experienced being is the subject experiencing itself and the world from within. This includes the self experiencing itself, experiencing other subjective beings. There is no such thing as object because there is no thing to experience itself as object. So let me say it again. There is no such thing as object because there is no thing to experience itself as object. We are only subjects with the illusion of experiencing other subjects as objects. The object exists only and definitively as an aspect of the subjective consciousness, the aspect that defines me, and that as some apprehension of a border between. As quantum physics shows us, this apprehension of a border is a purely subjective one and the kind of border found in cartoons and coloring books and in the more subtle technology of the human eye. Physically, i.e., in quantum reality, no border exists. No border exists in the reality of the spirit either, as the spirit is a conscious perception of real energy fields and interactions. The border perception is a function of the individual's experience of evolution through time and space. To initially perceive the reality of ourselves, perhaps, we need the border perception. In quotes, or in parentheses, they say infants with immature eyes don't have it. To begin to define the reality of the world, we need to erase it, to transcend it. Everything touches everything in the real world. There are no borders, and this is the fact upon which the validity of magic is based, i.e., to objectify us, to divide and conquer us. Patriarchy needs to insist on the reality of borders while denying the reality of magic. Only in this way can we be perceptually, intellectually, systematically separated and thus weakened while the great healing power of our common bondedness remains repressed. This common bond is no moral sentiment or humanist ideal, but a biological and quantum fact. Its sheer power, when raised from the subliminal to the conscious level, could generate an energy more than equivalent to all the stored destruction of our bombs. For within us is the stored creativity of billions and billions of atoms, and we know this. The thing that keeps us from activating our common creative evolutionary power is the perceptual and intellectual habit of separateness, i.e., 4,000 years of patriarchal ideology. Hold on, y'all. Wait. Because let me just say that one more time. This common bond is no moral sentiment or humanist ideal, but this common bondedness, this oneness, is a biological and quantum fact. This common bond is no moral sentiment or humanist ideal, but this oneness is a biological and quantum fact. Its sheer power, when raised from the subliminal to the conscious level, could generate an energy more than equivalent to all the stored destruction of our bombs. For within us is the stored creativity of billions and billions of atoms. And we know this. The thing that keeps us from activating our common creative evolutionary power is the perceptual and intellectual habit of separateness, i.e., 4,000 years of patriarchal ideology. All patriarchal religions have their mystics, and many of them come forward now to offer humanity a spiritual solution to our human crisis. But all these solutions occur within the terms of the problem, i.e., they are more examples of patriarchy perpetuating itself. Male mystics within patriarchal cultures and systems can never reach a true fusion in the depths of their beings of the sexual and spiritual powers. Patriarchy's pejorative definitions of sexuality and abstract definitions of spirit prohibit this fusion. Patriarchal mystics are out of resonance with the earth spirit, with ecstasy, and with the dead. Most of all, they are out of contact with female energy. Their patriarchal worldviews are based on a biophobic denial of this creative female energy in both women and men. All of us live in societies constructed out of this denial, societies that have attempted for 4 millennia to repress and destroy the bisexual nature of us all. In such nihilistic social energy fields, no real magic can happen. In its place, in the past 2 decades, we have witnessed and undergone many morbid, sad, and narcissistic trips. Mystics and all religious people within patriarchal systems must begin to deal honestly with the fact that patriarchy can never, ever be anything other than divided against itself. For this schizoid self-division is the basic ontological act upon which it is built. Union or fusion cannot happen within patriarchal terms. It is patriarchy, after all, which deliberately set out to banish and destroy ecstasy. What is ecstasy? It is our original state of being. It is the conscious expansion of the universe into a multitude of interconnected dimensions and forms. It is her dance of being from which all of us were born. Ecstasy is passion self-expressed through form. It is the case of Earth, human beings, and all other creatures and biological and geological activities are the forms. Wait a minute. In the case of Earth, human beings and all other creatures and biological and geological activities are the forms. Cosmic energy is the passion. Ecstasy is the source and reality of all we feel, see, and are. So then, why don't human beings exist in a state of constant ecstasy? If ecstasy is the inevitable expression of a being, if ecstasy is the inevitable expression of being a conscious form or living cell in a cosmic energy sea, why don't we cognize it or feel it? What obstructs almost all human beings beyond the age of 5 from knowing this experience, which is physically indigenous and ontologically rooted in the very fact of the universe existing at all? Surely we know the answer. Patriarchal systems tell us that ecstasy is impossible or wrong, except according to its terms, its alienating definitions. But ecstasy, by definition, cannot exist on patriarchal terms. Ecstasy is the complete ontological challenge to patriarchy's explanation of life. Where patriarchal religious and social systems cannot wholly repress ecstasy, they demonize it. Ecstasy becomes an underground or forbidden activity, most often experienced privately, accompanied by guilt, rarely in common accompanied by the whole world. But in and with the whole world is where we are supposed to feel it. In and with as the whole world is where our human ecstasy is born. In and with and as the whole world is where our human ecstasy is born. It is the celebration of the recognition that our spirit and flesh are one. It is the human female who was designed by evolution itself as the link between sexuality and spirit, between biological energy and the cosmic soul. It is the human female as the leading edge of earthly evolution who was specifically neurologically structured for the experience of ecstasy. For this reason, the first religions on earth were designed by women for women and in celebration of femaleness. For this reason, matrifocal cultures had no reason or need to deny the other, for all otherness was a part of the mother. In ecstasy, all otherness becomes the self, the one. Ancient women could not have invented, because they had no need for, paranoid divisions between psyche and body, power hungry manipulations of spirit versus matter, dualistic exploitations of flesh versus soul. They were the undivided ones, tapping into unhindered flows of ecstatic energy, which is both spiritual and biological, of earthly soil and cosmic thought together, not needing to tell a lie at the root of things, not needing to tell a lie at the root of things about the origin of life, not needing to maintain this lie by force day and night against the urges of all nature and its consciousness towards the truth. Women's cultures would not have needed to maintain themselves by energy repressive systems, by coercive and punitive surveillance systems based on social caste or economic status or skin color or eye color or dress, nor would there be any need for hierarchic organization, tyrannical terrors, or political frauds. All these patriarchal accoutrements are necessary to enforce a mechanical order in the absence of organic order. All these patriarchal machineries are necessary to enforce the repression of common ecstasy, an ecstasy indigenous to all cultures that exist to realize rather than to deny the one at the heart of all. A return to the goddess is not a backward trip through space. A return to the goddess is not a backward trip through space or time. The human race cannot really return to infancy. We're too far gone for that. We return to the goddess by remembering, redefining, respelling, by turning, as in a dance, away from one gesture towards another. Patriarchal ontology is based on a three-dimensional reality. Modern physics is showing us that the universe has not 4 dimensions, but as many as 11 dimensions. Perhaps more. The universe is undergoing ecstatic exponential expansion into 11 or more dimensions. Surely 3-dimensional religions cannot keep us in touch with such a universe. If we do not want to die, then we must evolve, and that means we must dance, expand exponentially with the dancing cosmos. We return to the cosmos only by becoming lovers of life rather than life's victims, voyeurs, and policemen. How twisted we have become within biophobic religions, spending most of our waking hours in grotesque postures of aggression, hurry, hate, self-righteousness, resentment, paranoia, and murderousness. Under the rule of the patriarchal God, we are all gargoyles, characterized by rigid poses that reveal mostly all our terrible fears and greeds, eaten away from the inside by cancerous needs. To return to harmony, to return to the goddess, to become lovers of the goddess once again, we must realign our gestures into those of dancers. We must become beings who do not wish to control life, but only to listen to its music and dance it. This is not easy to do. It might be impossible, but it is our only alternative to mass death, whether by war or by total global mechanization. The patriarchal God has only one commandment: punish life for being what it is. The goddess also has only one commandment: love life, for it is what it is. The patriarchal God has only one commandment: punish life for being what it is. The goddess also has only one commandment: love life, for it is what it is. Women, designed by evolution as the links between spirit and flesh, are perhaps also designed by the cosmos to lead the human world back now to the great celebration of the reconciliation of flesh and spirit. Thus, at the very edge of death, we will return to the beginning. That is, at the end of the world where we must surely be, we will return to the goddess, the great mother of all life, as her magic children. In a round world, the only way for human beings to survive the end is to return to the beginning. Thus, we complete a circle, but on a spiral. We revolve to a larger circle. Now is the time to make again sacred our experience. Which power, it is said, WITCH, which power, it is said, cannot truly die, since it is a real power of the real cosmos. It can't die. It can only be forgotten. That means it can also be remembered, as the serpent can be awakened from its tranced sleep at the bottom of the spine and induced to rise to become again the luminous flying bird of the imagining mind. Once we thoroughly understand how and why patriarchy acquired its power over us, the power of an entrenched mistake over the minds and lives of all people, once we understand and feel clearly that the fight of which women, WITCH, which women is also the fight of Earth's people everywhere against mechanical subjugation and exploitation, once we reestablish the magic link between the individual psyche and the Earth's vital energy flow, between all evolving matter and all evolving spirit, and learn to encourage and teach others to do the same in a loving return to what we always were, perhaps then, in the final time of crisis, the serpent goddess will shake herself loose from her deep, exiled sleep in the earth's belly. Perhaps the serpent of life's flowing energy will begin to rise again, all luminous and of the earth, and the children of the great mother will rise up with it, and the universe will be our home again as before. This flight is not an escape, but a return. The only way for human beings to survive the end is to return to the beginning. And now listen to the great words of the mother. She says, "Whenever ye have need of anything, once in the month, and better it be when the moon is full, then ye shall assemble in some secret place. To these I will teach the things that are yet unknown, and ye shall be free from all slavery. Keep pure your highest ideas. Strive ever toward it. Let nothing stop you nor turn you aside. Mine is the cup of wine of life and the cauldron of Ceridwen. I am the mother of all living, and my love is poured out upon the earth. I am the beauty of the green earth, and the white moon among the stars, and the mystery of the waters, and the desire in the heart of woman. Before my face, let thine innermost self be unfolded in the raptures of the infinite. Know the mystery, that if that which thou seekest, thou findest not within thee, thou wilt never find it without thee. For behold, I have been with thee from the beginning, and I await thee now. Blessed be." That concludes the reading of the great cosmic mother, Rediscovering the Religion of the Earth. I am close to tears, but I am not going to be emotional, but I am filled with gratitude. I am on a journey toward great remembering. And I am so excited. I am at peace. You know, there's like a contentment, there's a rest, there's a knowing, there's a remembering, there's a reconnecting. So, again, the reading of this twice now has been such a great is not the right word, but what an profound transformational journey it has been as I sit, with the words. And it's not to say that I don't stay in a place of neutrality. It's not to say that I'm like adopting anything, because, and that's the beauty of it. You don't have to. You know what I'm saying? You don't have to, but just allow it to do what it do. You know what I'm saying? It's like your soul already knows. And so that's why when what resonates for you, that's your truth. You know what I'm saying? And also, like Dr. Delbert would always say, truth is not truth until you decide what truth is. Much love, much gratitude. I love you guys. Seriously, I love you guys. And I'm looking forward to our new spiral. Yes, baby. Love you.